Good evening. We're going to start as usual with our introductions. And this time we are going to ask you that answer 2 questions or tell us the following. What is it that you are selling and to whom are you selling it? So basically this is the elevator speech. I'm going to say in Spanish. Buenas tardes a todos. Vamos a empezar como siempre con nuestra presentación de cada uno y esta vez le vamos a pedir que nos digan 2 preguntas. Una es ¿qué es lo que ustedes venden? La segunda es ¿a quién se lo venden o cuál es su cliente? ¿Ok? Empezamos con...
Sorry, Octavio, and then we're doing that in 10 seconds.
Yes, exactly. Sorry, I forgot about the time. You only have 10 seconds.
That's the challenge.
Which is the elevator speech, by the way. It's like, meet somebody in the elevator and telling in 10 seconds. Es como si se encuentran con alguien en un elevador, se presentan y le dicen en 10 segundos qué es lo que hace. Ok, empezamos con Juan Candelaria. We start with Juan.
Hola, hello. My name is Juan Candelaria Vasquez. I'm a photographer based out of Buffalo, New York, and I sell photographs for photographic content for small businesses like your own.
Él es un fotógrafo y se dedica a hacer fotografías para los clientes en general. Thank you, Juan. Next, I have Amy.
Hi, my name is Amy and my business partner is Lauren, and we'll be providing dog owners and soon to be dog owners with Charlie's Canine Camp, which will offer boarding, training, daycare, and grooming.
Ellos tienen un negocio que se llama K9, van a básicamente a hacerse cargo de los perros, hacen todo lo que es cuidado y el grooming de los animales. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Lauren. Marta, siguiente.
Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Marta Monserrate. Tengo una compañía llamada DEJ Cleaner, limpiando casas y oficinas.
Marta is saying hello, everybody, and she has a company that is dedicated to clean offices and residences. Gracias, Marta. Next, I have Kimberly Vacuum.
Hi, my name is Kimberly. I'm trying to start a home care / CNA business where I'll provide personal care, errands, respite, housekeeping, and meal prepping.
Kimberly tiene un negocio de home care donde van a prestar cuidados a la gente grande, a la población mayor. Thank you, Kimberly. Rolando, ¿puedes presentar?
Mi nombre es Rolando, soy de la ciudad de Rochester y mi negocio se trata de reparación de casa. Y en este momento me encuentro trabajando en ella y trabajo para la ciudad de Rochester. Y si tuviese un encuentro con alguien en un elevador, pues le diría a qué me dedico, qué sé hacer, qué pudiera hacer y así pudiera intercambiar experiencia y adquirir nuevos clientes.
Rolando has a company that is dedicated to home maintenance, and that's basically what he does, repairing. Gracias, Rolando.
Gracias.
Next, I have Jacqueline Nieves.
Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Jacqueline Nieves. Mi propósito por estar aquí es que estoy interesada en tener un negocio, un restaurante de comida puertorriqueña. Se especializaría en eventos para todo tipo de eventos, catering sería la palabra, bandejas de fritura, comidas para llevar. Hasta ahora el nombre pensado sería Jackie's Kitchen.
Okay, Jack is going to start with a business called Jackie's Kitchen, basically dedicated to Puerto Rican food. Let me make a pause here. I have a Jacoby on the chat. Jacob saying he's Jacoby and he'll be found in a nonprofit farm and CSA that will provide fresher, healthier foods to families and individuals that are experiencing food insecurity. Food will be provided to charitable donations, but I will selling agricultural products to business and the public to raise funds. Jacoby va a formar una granja de no profit y es un CSA que va a proveer comidas saludables a las familias y los individuos que tienen problemas de seguridad con la comida. Okay, next I have Matt.
Hello, my name is Matt, and I am going to sell high quality coffee and tea and farm to table food. And I'll primarily be selling to college students.
Matt dice que va a tener una tienda de café y va a ser básicamente su cliente principal, los estudiantes. Thank you, Matt. Kimberly Chappell.
Hi, my name's Kimberly, and my business is called Elite Tumbling, and I am going to be starting off with high school and like elementary kids ages to start classes with, and I'll be providing tumbling classes and cheerleading classes for them.
Okay, Kimberly va a tener un negocio donde va a ayudar a los chicos de las escuelas primarias y darles orientación y ayuda. Thank you, Kimberly. Gracias, Kimberly. Kayla Diaz.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kayla Diaz. I make customized cakes for all occasions, and I would be selling to pretty much anybody who has any type of event coming up, any reason why you would want to add a beautiful cake. You can contact me and we'll make it happen.
Okay. Kayla tiene un negocio de customized cakes. Básicamente va a vender pasteles a toda la gente que quiera pasteles. Siguiente tenemos Cherelle.
Hello, my name is Terrell, and my business is called The Gift of Gathering. It's a event venue, and it's a place where people can rent it out for birthday parties, baby showers, small weddings, reception, and like repass.
Okay. Thank you. Cherelle dice que tiene un negocio que se llama el obsequio de juntarse, donde básicamente va a hacer fiestas, cumpleaños, etc. Thank you. María Cartagena. Maria is writing on the chat, says, my name is Maria, planning to open a custom-made gift shop. I still don't have the store open yet. María dice que planea abrir una tienda de regalos hecha específicamente para cada cliente y todavía no tiene la tienda abierta. Okay. Next I have Karina Chamorro.
Oops. Hola, mi nombre es Karina. Tengo un negocio de graphic designs que hacemos logos, stickers, decals, tarjetas de negocio. Actualmente sí estamos haciendo las cosas y hacemos envíos. Hemos hecho envíos a Puerto Rico. Hi, my name is Karina. We currently have a graphic design business. We do logos, stickers, decals, business cards. We're currently doing currently selling stuff and doing logos and stuff, and we have shipped to Puerto Rico.
Gracias. Fred Ferrer. Fred, ¿me escuchas? I guess not. Matt, can you introduce yourself, please?
I already went.
Okay, sorry. Then I think we have everybody. Right? Agustin, are we missing somebody?
Fred just unmuted. Hey Fred, ¿nos escucha?
I'm trying.
Adelante, Fred, te puedes presentar?
¿Me escuchan?
Sí.
Saludos, mi nombre es Fred Ferrer. Estamos tratando de montar, ¿verdad? Estamos aprendiendo para abrir un negocio sobre una pizzería diferente. A través del cono pizza, lo que llamamos el cono pizza.
Okay. Fred mentioned that he's trying to establish a business in the food area. It's a different concept of pizza. It's called corn pizza. All right. Thank you, everybody. Agustin.
Actually, Anne, can you introduce our speaker?
Yes, I'm happy to. Thank you, Octavio, and
You're welcome.
greetings, everyone. Hello.
One thing, actually, antes de comenzar, si quieren escuchar en español, por favor vayan abajo en el cuartito de español. Ya pueden brincar ahí. Daniela los está esperando ahí para interpretación. That was a note for the Spanish speakers who want to jump into the Spanish room now. Go ahead, Anne.
So before we introduce David Roach, our guest speaker, who is an attorney with Roach, Lennon and Brown, this is a friendly reminder that we are speaking in 2 languages. And if you have a question or a comment when you're speaking, we're all just going to be, let's all remember to slow down a little bit, give Daniela time to translate. It's okay to say your thought and then pause. Let's just remember to pause between our thoughts. So we're all going to pause between our thoughts. It's easier for her to hear a full sentence and then say it. And so hopefully I'm communicating that clearly. So Daniela says thanks. And I'm really saying this to myself as a reminder to myself. So tonight we're happy to welcome David Roach. He's partner and founder of Roach, Lennon and Brown. His practice areas include business law, estates and trusts, environmental, tax, and litigation. David is a graduate of Harvard Law School, and he is a Fulbright specialist. You'll find all of this information on our Google site, but I just want to read it so you hear it one time. David has been an adjunct professor at Canisius College in Buffalo. He has taught programs at the American College in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. He has taught at Erie and Niagara Community Colleges. And he has also taught multiple law programs in Poland and in Sicily. I used to try to name all those cities, but I'm not going to name them tonight. David is an entrepreneur. He had a law firm before he started this law firm. Some people may think about retiring. Instead, he started a new law firm in 2018, Roach, Lennon and Brown. Since 1981, he's presented over 300 small business workshops, including for the SBA, the Small Business Administration, SCORE, the Small Business Development Center, known as the SBDC, and for us, for Ibero Business Center. And I just want to say that when you have mentors that can share this kind of information, that's very helpful. It's really helpful to our program, and it's very helpful for you to be able to ask questions of an attorney who works with small businesses. So David, I'd like to turn it over to you. However you want to take questions, if people have questions, if it's okay, should they put them in the chat or just raise their hand, we turn it over to you. So thanks for being here once again.
Thank you for inviting me. If you have questions, it's probably best to write them in chat, and I'll try to answer as we progress. So tonight, I'm going to talk about one topic, the forms of business organization. I'm going to talk about 3 different types of business organization: the proprietorship, the partnership, and limited liability entities. My purpose tonight is to give you a better understanding of which one of those 3 forms is the best for your business. Again, any questions along the way, please just write them in chat. So let's start with the simplest form of business organization, the sole proprietorship. Calling it the sole proprietorship is really redundant because all proprietorships are sole proprietorships. By that I mean a sole proprietorship has just one owner, a single owner. It's the simplest form of business organization of the 3 that we'll talk about. It's simplest because it has the fewest legal requirements to forming. One of the few requirements is that if you use a name for your business other than your own name, you have to register the business at the county hall for the county where you're doing business. So, for example, if I were to call my business David L. Roach, you would have no idea what my business is. You've all just explained your businesses in your elevator pitch, and you're probably going to pick a name for your business that describes it. So if you're using a name for your proprietorship other than your own name, you have to file this business certificate in the county hall for the county where your business is located. The certificate is very simple. It has your name, your address, the name of your business, and it costs $35 to file with the county clerk. There are a few other requirements to being a business in general that are not specific to the proprietorship, but important to talk about. First, if your business involves the sale of a product or a service that is subject to New York sales tax, you have to file with the New York State Department of Taxation and Finance as a sales tax vendor. Once you've filed, you're responsible for reporting your sales 4 times a year, unless you're a very small tax collector, less than $1,000 of tax per year, you file only once. But the first year, you'll file every 3 months. Now, don't register and then fail to file because you don't have any tax that you collected. Even if you have a quarter where you don't collect any tax, you must file the return, or otherwise there will be penalties. Second general requirement is that if you employ any employees, you have to file with the New York State Department of Labor. You file with the Department of Labor because you, as an employer, will be paying unemployment insurance tax for each of your employees. So these requirements are not specific to the proprietorship. They're common to all the business forms we talk about. So thus far, the only thing we've talked about doing to become a proprietor is filing that business certificate in the county where your business is located if you're using a name other than your own. Sometimes that name is referred to as a DBA, doing business as, or as an assumed name, or a fictitious name. It's all the same. Now, names are very important in business because you don't want your public, your customers, to be confused or to confuse you with another company that has a similar name. How do you find out if your name is unique and doesn't violate anyone else's naming rights? Well, when you go to file your business certificate at the county hall, there's an index which lists all the businesses that have already filed. When you review that index, you can see if anyone else has already taken the name you wanted. If they have, you don't want to file the business certificate with the same name. That probably ends up in the prior business contacting you through their lawyer and telling you to stop using their name. Obviously, in our current days of the internet, it's also easy to do a search right on the internet to see if there's any other business using a name other than your own name. Now, sometimes you might want protection for your name to extend throughout the country. You've probably heard the terms trademark or trade name. That's a registration with the federal government of your name, your trade name, and the mark, the distinctive way your name is displayed. An example of this would be Coca-Cola. Everyone knows Coca-Cola. It's a unique name, but it also has a very unique mark, the script, the way the name is written on all of the products. So if you are selling a product, or if you think your company will extend beyond New York's borders, you probably want to file a trade name registration with the United States Patent and Trademark Office in Washington. I see we have a question. Can a proprietor have employees? Yes. A proprietor cannot have a co-owner or co-owners. The proprietor is the only owner, but the proprietor can have as many employees as the business needs. And again, that's why you would register with the New York State Department of Labor once you have employees. All right. So if it's so simple.
Let me translate that next question for you,
Oh,
David.
please.
There is one in Spanish. It says, hello, can you register, to register a business, do you first have to register or get a location, like a rental space first, or a property first?
Very good question. Answer is no, because when you register the proprietorship on a business certificate, you're going to list your name as the owner and your address. Now, that can be your home address, or it could be the address of your business. So if you register your proprietor name with a business certificate in the county where your business is located, and you don't have a specific location, use your home address. And that establishes when you first started using that name. So if it's so simple, why isn't everyone doing business as a proprietor? Well, one of the obvious reasons is sometimes we have co-owners in our business, multiple owners. For example, in a partnership, like my law firm, we have multiple partners. In many corporations or limited liability companies, there are multiple owners. So if we're going to have partners, other owners, we can't be a proprietorship. But the really important reason why most businesses aren't proprietorships is because proprietors have unlimited individual liability for all of the debts of their business. In other words, there really isn't a difference between the proprietor as a business and the proprietor as an individual. The debts of the business are the personal debts of the individual. So when deciding whether or not you should be a proprietor, you have to consider, what are the risks of this business? And so let's think about a particular business. Let's analyze one. A simple business, a pizza parlor. So if you're going to open a pizza parlor, your business plan anticipates you will rent some space, you will buy certain equipment, you will buy certain supplies in order to make and sell pizzas. And so your liability is something you control. You only purchase what you can afford. That's a pretty simple analysis. When you do your business plan, if you project in your financials that there will be positive cash flow, the buying of necessary inventory, necessary products, necessary space, that's something within your control, and that isn't very risky. Let's consider a second example. My pizza parlor is up and running. I'm leasing the space. And imagine this, it's a rainy or a snowy day in Western New York. And as my customers are coming in and out, the floor is getting wet and slippery. A customer comes in, she slips, falls, and breaks her leg. Am I, Dave, the proprietor, personally liable for the injuries to that person? Yes, I am. And we all know from all the lawyers who advertise on television that I'm liable because I was negligent. And that's a legal term meaning I was careless. I allowed a dangerous condition to exist, a slippery floor. And as a direct result, one of my customers was injured. I will be responsible for the medical treatment she receives, the transportation to the hospital, the time she might not be able to work because of her injuries. I'll have to replace her lost compensation. So this is a risk. It's a risk of any business that has a place of business where customers come and go. Fortunately, there's a very simple way to control this risk, and that is insurance. In fact, if I rent my place of business, my landlord will require me to have general comprehensive liability insurance that insures my business as well as my landlord from any damages to people's personal injury, or their property. And so again, we've identified a risk, but we can control that risk by simply getting insurance. So let's think even harder. What if the following happens? It's late one night, we're about to close, and an order comes in for a large number of pizzas. 20 minutes later, a group of people show up at my place of business, and they're very drunk. And before we can collect the money we're owed, one of these customers pulls down one of the pizza boxes and he starts stuffing himself on the pizza. A couple minutes later, he's choking. And a couple minutes after that, he's dead. Am I, Dave, the proprietor, liable for the damages to the dead person? Well, there isn't necessarily a clear yes or no answer to that. The theory of law is that if I am a manufacturer of an inherently dangerous product, I am responsible for any damages it causes. Now, you might be thinking, gee whiz, a pizza isn't inherently dangerous. I have them all the time, and it's never been a life-threatening experience. But in this instance, there was an injury, and if I can't satisfy the survivors of the deceased with some payment, most likely I'll be sued. And if I'm a proprietor, it's me personally who gets sued. Remember, there's no difference between my business and myself. They're one and the same for purposes of liability. And it might turn out that the injured person was a relatively young man, let's say 35 years old. And let's say he had a wife about the same age and two very young children. And let's finally say he was making $250,000 a year. Now, why is all of that important? Well, his estate, because he's deceased, and his widow and children are going to sue my business for the loss of his support. And he was legally obligated to support his spouse for the rest of her life, and legally obligated to support his children until they turned 21. And he would have worked for many more years. So his loss has cost his family millions of dollars. Ultimately, a jury may have to decide this lawsuit, and they may resolve the question of my liability and damages on a very emotional basis, feeling sorry for this young woman who's lost her husband and these very young children who've lost their father. So we've just decided, or we've just determined, there could be a very big risk involved in a business as simple as making and selling pizza. We had two people here tonight that I heard, Matt, and I think Karina might have been the other, who intend on being in a business of providing food and providing beverages to customers. If you're in a business where the product you sell is something that someone drinks or eats, you're in a risky business. And you should not be a proprietor in that business. Rather, you should incorporate or form an LLC, something we'll talk about a little bit later. The bottom line is the proprietorship is a simple form of business organization, but it has all of the risks staying personally with the owner. I have another question here, and it's about an LLC, so maybe I'll hold off on LLC. I see Fred and Kyla and Matt are selling food items. My advice, don't do it as proprietors. So let's talk about the second form of business organization, the partnership. Partnerships are a lot like proprietorships in some ways, but there are also differences. The first obvious difference is we have multiple owners. A partnership must have at least 2 partners, but literally could have hundreds of partners. It just has to have more than one. It's similar to a proprietorship because partners, just like proprietors, are personally liable for all of the debts of their business if the business can't pay for them. So there are some similarities. Another difference is that a partnership can only be formed by a contract between or among the owners. What do I mean by that? Well, let's assume that Dave's Pizza survives the killer pizza case and continues in business. And I have an employee, let's call her Mary, who has been with the business as an employee for many years. And Mary comes to me one day and says, Dave, I would like to be your partner. I would like to own this business with you. What do you say? And I say, okay, you can be my partner. Have Mary and I formed a partnership by contract? Often people are surprised to know that yes, they formed a partnership by that simple dialogue. Well, how is that? A contract isn't a document. It's not a piece of paper. A contract is an agreement. It's a meeting of the minds. It's an offer, can I be your partner? And an acceptance, yes. That simple dialogue created the partnership. In other words, it doesn't have to be written to be enforceable. So then your next question would logically be, well, if Dave and Mary are partners, what's the deal between the two of them? How much of the partnership does each one own? What is the share of profit that each is entitled to? How much debt do they each have to pay? The answers to all those questions are in the law. And in New York, it's called the partnership law. And the partnership law says partners can agree on any terms for their business relationship. But if they don't agree on certain specifics, we look to the partnership law to fill in the blanks in their agreement. Now, in my example, Dave and Mary didn't discuss any specifics. So if we looked at the partnership law, it would say, unless the partners decide differently, number one, each of them owns an equal share of the business. So it's 50-50 ownership. Number two, each is entitled to an equal share of the profit. Number 3, each is responsible for an equal share of the loss. And the partnership law goes on and on for dozens of sections, filling out all the particulars of the partnership agreement. And it fills out all those particulars because Mary and Dave didn't. Mary and Dave have what oftentimes is called a handshake deal. They simply have a handshake on the partnership without any of the details being filled in. So we look to the partnership law to fill those in. Now let's assume that Dave is a little smarter than he looks, and when Mary says, let's be partners, or can I be your partner? That's her offer. Dave makes a counteroffer. His counteroffer is, well, Mary, you can be, but only on the following terms and conditions. I'll own 75%, you'll own 25%. And that's the same percentage we'll use to divide the profit or to allocate the loss. And Dave goes on and on with all of these descriptions. And Mary is tired of even listening and says, okay. Again, we formed a contract, all on terms that Dave has proposed and Mary has accepted. And many of them are very different than what the partnership law provides. Did they write it down? No, they didn't have to write it down. Very few contracts must be in writing to be valid. One of the few is a contract for the sale or the purchase of real estate. If you've ever purchased a house or commercial real estate, you know that you signed a very long agreement, your offer, and the seller, if he or she accepted it, signed as well. That's because of very old English law. The statute of frauds says only certain kinds of contracts must be written down to be valid. And again, it's not the writing that's the contract. The contract is the meeting of minds, the agreement. The writing is just a description of what it was. Why do we write things down? Well, some of us have bad memories, and it's possible that at some point in the future, Dave and Mary could disagree about their business. And if they get to the point where they want to dissolve the business, Mary might say she has 50%, just like the partnership law says. But Dave would say, oh no, we had a different agreement. Mary says, but we didn't write it down. Dave says, we didn't have to. And so now, if they end up in a lawsuit and they testify, our jurors are going to have to decide who's telling the truth and who's not. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I wasn't in school the day the teacher taught us how to tell when a person is speaking the truth rather than speaking a lie. And so that's why, as lawyers, when we counsel businesses, we advise the partners or the shareholders, the owners, to always write down their agreements. At a minimum, so no one forgets. But more importantly, if there's ever a disagreement, we've got a document and we can look to that to describe what the parties agreed to, perhaps years earlier. There's another difference between a proprietorship and a partnership that's very important. And that's something called joint and several liability. Joint and several liability. And that means that every partner is liable for the entire debt of the partnership, regardless of his or her ownership. So let's take Dave and Mary as our example. Dave decides that the business needs an automobile to deliver pizzas. Mary doesn't think it's a good idea, but she only has 25%, he has 75%. So off he goes. He buys an automobile in the name of the business, the partnership, and he borrows all the money for it. Let's say $50,000 in the name of the partnership. And then he disappears with the car. A month or two later, the finance people show up and they say, Mary, are you a partner in this business? She says, yes. They say, good. You owe us $50,000. And when she finds out the reason, she tells them to wait a second. I've got a piece of paper here, a partnership agreement, that shows I only own 25%, and I'm only responsible for 25% of the debt. And the finance people explain, well, that's the agreement between you and your partner. But all partners have joint and several liability. So severally, which means separately, you have to pay us the entire $50,000. That's joint and several liability. When Mary pays, she can then go after Dave to get his 75% contribution, but that's between the two of them. And let's say she's successful in suing him and gets a judgment for his 75%. A judgment isn't any good until you collect it. And perhaps when she goes to collect it, she finds out Dave doesn't have any money. So her judgment is essentially worthless. The moral of the story with joint and several liability, you should be very careful who you go into business with in a partnership. They can create debts by themselves, which the business might not be able to pay, and which you might end up paying, only to find out they can't contribute and reimburse you for paying their share. How do you do that? I recommend to clients, before you enter into that partnership, each partner should provide a complete financial statement, just like the kind you would file with the bank when you're going for a loan. Because that discloses to everyone in the business whether your partners are solvent, whether they have more assets than liabilities, whether they can pay their debts when they become due, so that there are no surprises when you apply for the bank loan and find out your partner's not qualified, or when you find out your partner created a liability, the partnership doesn't have the funds to pay for it, and you get stuck paying the entire debt. I've got a couple questions here. If you bear with me, I'm going to hold off on the LLC question. And I have a question. If I were to have a partnership, would it be best for each to have our own entity, then contract as partners under a business name? What's the benefit of owning a company with partnership versus partnering my business with other businesses? Well, I think if it were two businesses forming a partnership, that's fine, but it makes life a little more complicated. Unless your business that is going to be a partner is a corporation or an LLC. So if Dave and Mary had their own corporations and their corporations formed the partnership which sold the pizzas, the liability of the partners would be limited because the partners are corporate entities. They're limited liability entities. And this may become clearer when we talk about those next. There was another question: are proprietors and partners personally liable for losses or damages? Well, really both, because damages implies personal injury, and if it's not adequately insured or not insured at all, partners are liable. But they're liable for losses in the sense that if the business is losing money, it's the proprietor or the partners who are putting additional funds back into the business to cover the losses. So in each case, it's a personal liability. We've got a good question here to lead us to our next topic. Can a sole proprietor turn into an LLC later? Yes. So let's talk about corporations and LLCs. And as Ann suggested from my very long resume, I've been doing this for a long time. And years ago, when we got to this point of talking about business organizations, I would only talk about corporations because there were no such things as limited liability companies, LLCs. Those came into New York law in the early 1990s. But they're pretty similar. So let's start by talking about corporations. A corporation is an entity that is separate from its owners. Think of the largest corporations in the world: Apple, Walmart, Amazon. These are companies that have hundreds of thousands of shareholders. Shareholders own corporations. Shareholders elect a board of directors to run the corporation, but the board doesn't run day-to-day activities. The board appoints officers to do that. So that's the model of a corporation: an entity owned by shareholders, managed by a board of directors, and run by officers. Now let's apply that, because the same model is applicable to the smallest corporation in the world, Dave's Pizza Incorporated. And let's talk about that corporation before Mary becomes involved as an owner. So Dave is the sole proprietor, just as in this question. He's thought about the risks of being in a business where you sell a product that people ingest, and there could be injuries. He doesn't want that exposure. So he takes the assets of his business, contributes them to a corporation that he forms, and in exchange, he receives the stock and becomes the owner of that corporation. Now, Dave, as the sole owner of the corporation, can have 1 share of stock or 10,000 shares of stock. It doesn't matter. He's the only shareholder. Then Dave has an election for the board of directors. And he needs 1 director for Dave's Pizza Incorporated, and that'll be Dave. And then he meets wearing his board of director hat, and he appoints himself president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, all of the offices he wants, because he's the only person who owns and manages this company. And that's perfectly legitimate. And he's doing it so that if he ever manufactures the killer pizza, and if it's determined that he owes the estate and the survivors of the injured, of the deceased customer $2 million, it's not Dave who owes the $2 million. It's Dave's Pizza Inc. that owes the $2 million. And if when that judgment is rendered, Dave's Pizza Inc. has $2,000 worth of assets, it pays those assets over and goes out of business. and Dave gets to get in his expensive car and drive to his expensive home and contemplate his next business. Because Dave took the risks of that business and he put them inside of that corporation, that artificial entity that he created, so that all of the risk of the business was going to be held inside the corporation. So how do we do this? Very simply, we send a certificate or articles of incorporation to the New York State Secretary of State. The filing fee, I think currently is about $235. And our certificate gives the name of the company, of the corporation, the address, and that's all there is to it. The one difference between naming our corporation and naming our proprietorship is that when we went to County Hall with the business certificate for our proprietorship, even if there were 10 other proprietorships that had already filed using the same name, the county clerk will take our certificate and file it. And that's because her job is simply to file, not to determine whether or not the name conflicts with any other names. But when we go to the Secretary of New York State to file our corporate certificate, it will not be filed unless the name of our corporation is unique to New York. In other words, there can be no other Dave's Pizza Inc. that is either filed as a New York corporation or LLC, or a corporation or LLC from another state with that name that's registered to do business in New York. How do we know our name is going to be acceptable? We can get on the state website for the Secretary of State and we can search under business names to see if there's a Dave's Pizza. And if there isn't, we know that our certificate will be accepted and will be incorporated. If there is a conflict, we have to choose a different name. So once we're incorporated, we establish our shareholders, we establish our board, we establish our officers, and we have now protected, insulated our owner, Dave, from the risks of his business, Dave's Pizza Incorporated. Again, the entire exercise here is determining the risks involved in the business. Now, what's an LLC? Well, a limited liability company is virtually the same thing as a corporation. It is the same because the liability stops at the entity. Whether it's Dave's Pizza Inc. or Dave's Pizza LLC, the judgment the estate gets for the killer pizza can only be collected from the assets of the corporation or the LLC. The differences really involve terminology. We've already talked about corporations being owned by shareholders. LLC's owners are called members. So members in an LLC are the same as shareholders in a corporation. The corporation had a board of directors elected by the shareholders. The LLC has a manager. There's no board of directors. And if the manager is also the owner, Dave, then we describe the manager as a managing member. And so there are no other officers like a president or vice president for an LLC. There could be, but there doesn't have to be. There just needs to be a manager. What's the difference? between an LLC and a corporation if you're making a choice. It all has to do with taxes, and it's more than we can talk about in the limited time that we have. Let me look to a question here, and let's see here. We've got a question. Would a nonprofit fall under an LLC? No. There is a separate statute in New York called the Not-for-Profit Corporation Law. And if you want to create a not-for-profit, it has to be filed under that particular statute. So it will be a corporation, but a not-for-profit corporation. Another question. What's your opinion on incorporating out of state, say Delaware, because of the tax breaks and lower costs? I'm sorry here, I'm just trying to get to, and getting a foreign qualification to work in New York. Well, that's the problem. If you incorporate in Delaware, but you're going to be selling pizza in downtown Buffalo, you're going to have to register your foreign corporation, your Delaware corporation, and lawyers call that foreign when it's from a different state. You're going to have to register that with the New York Secretary of State, and that costs as much registration as it does to incorporate in New York. Secondly, the taxes aren't lower because all of your income is going to be earned in New York. So even if you're a foreign corporation, you pay income tax to the state where you earn your income. The primary reason to incorporate in Delaware, if you're going to be in New York, is if you anticipate becoming a more public company with outside shareholders in the future. Delaware is more favorable to public corporations because its law protects management. And in a public corporation, management is usually separate from ownership. Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, owns a lot of Apple stock, but he doesn't even own 1%. So big companies are incorporated in Delaware or Nevada because they're very friendly to public companies. No need to do it if you're going to be doing business only in New York. Another good question, is a corporation the same as an S corporation? Yes. In one sense, an S corporation is a term of tax law. It's not a term of corporate law. In the little time I have left, I'll try to explain the S corporation, and that will make sense then in understanding why we have limited liability companies.
David, I just want to say, take your time. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks. So the primary reason to incorporate is to take the risks of the business and separate them from the personal liability of the owner. Okay? So we incorporate for liability purposes. But then it turns out for tax purposes, we may have a disadvantage in doing our corporation. Corporations are taxpayers, just like individuals. But when we incorporate, and I'm the only shareholder, I can virtually guarantee the corporation will never have taxable income. Why is that? Well, first of all, and importantly, it's not because I'm going to cheat on my taxes. Secondly, it's because whatever profit, whatever income the corporation is able to earn, I'm going to pay to myself as compensation. Therefore, it's a deduction from the corporation's income. So the corporation is always going to have zero taxable income because it will be paying that to me, the owner, as compensation. But when I first incorporate, when I start my business, or even throughout the course of my business, I'll probably purchase quite a bit of equipment, and I'll be able to take a deduction for the depreciation in the value of that equipment. So let's say the first year, I have $100,000 worth of depreciable property that I purchase. Now that reduces my taxable income because it's a deduction. But my corporation's never going to have taxable income because I'm paying it all to myself. So I've lost the ability to use the depreciation from those purchases to offset my taxable income. That's when subchapter S comes in. Subchapter S is a tax status. It's an IRS status. It's a corporation saying to the IRS, even though the corporation is a taxpayer, we want to elect to be taxed under subchapter S, which means we won't pay any tax, whatever our income, whatever our loss, it will pass through directly to our shareholder. So it's a tax status. It's not a different entity. It's very similar to the situation if you're married. You can file a joint income tax return, or married people can each file a separate return. Whether you're married filing joint or married filing separate is a tax status. You're still married in either case. So a corporation is either a taxpayer, and that's under something we call subchapter C, or it isn't a taxpayer, it elects under subchapter S to just pass through its income or its losses to its owners, to its shareholders. And so in my example, where the corporation had a $100,000 loss the first year because of depreciation, if I'm a sub S elected corporation, I pass that loss through to my shareholder. And if my shareholder has a spouse who's making an income, the loss on my tax, on what's called a K1, offsets the income on her W-2. So that's why sub S came into the law decades ago. Now, over the years, the rules to qualify for subchapter S were somewhat restrictive. And one of the important rules was that every shareholder had to be a resident of the United States. And so if I had, as let's say Mary was a shareholder in Dave's Pizza, but she wasn't a US citizen and she was living in Fort Erie, Ontario, and coming over the bridge every day to work, she would be, under the tax law, a non-resident alien, and that would disqualify the subchapter S election. Or if we went back to one of our questions before, could we have two entities owning a partnership? We could have two entities owning a corporation. I have a corporation, Mary has a corporation. Our corporations become the shareholders for Dave's Pizza, Inc. Again, it's not a natural person, so you can't elect subchapter S. The LLC law came into effect so that we could still have limited liability, keep the risks in the business, protect the owners, but also have the pass-through of subchapter S in cases where subchapter S wasn't available because we had a disqualifying shareholder. So that's simply the reason for it. A sub S corporation is a description of tax status. Most of you in small businesses who incorporate will elect subchapter S. If for any reason you couldn't, then you would form an LLC to get the same benefit of sub S that you
For
didn't qualify
interpretation
for.
purposes, do you mind repeating
I'm
that
sorry?
again and a little slower?
I'm sorry. So I want to have the tax consequences of my corporation to pass through to me. I elect subchapter S status. If I can't elect subchapter S because one of my shareholders is disqualifying, then I form an LLC because it doesn't have the same restrictions. Another reason for the LLC formation, and this is a small reason to select LLC, but if you were a proprietor, a sole owner, you did your analysis and said, this is too risky a business for me to be a proprietor, and instead formed an LLC. If there's just one member, one owner, the IRS describes the LLC as an organization that doesn't exist, essentially. They allow a single member LLC to file taxes in disregard of the entity. And so, ironically, a proprietor files his or her business taxes on Schedule C of the Form 1040. So too does an LLC sole owner, sole member, disregarded for tax purposes, doesn't file a separate tax return, but just like a proprietor, all of the income, expense, all of the business taxes are on Schedule C of the personal tax return. So if you're a sole owner of your LLC, you save the cost of an extra tax return that would be required for a corporation, an S Corp, or an LLC with multiple owners. Just looking to see if we've got another question. There is a question in Spanish. If someone could help me with that, from Jacqueline.
Yeah, I can translate that. It says, for a food business, what is better for the business, LLC or corporation?
Okay, and what kind of business?
Food business.
A food business. Well, either is a good idea because of the risk, but I would say the major determination on which to choose goes back to what I've just explained. If you're a sole owner, one person, one member, then you should be an LLC rather than a corporation to avoid having to prepare an extra tax return for the corporation. Definitely form an LLC in that case. I think I've got maybe okay. Any other questions at this point? Okay. So we've now
Someone did raise their hand, I noticed.
Sorry?
There was someone that raised their hand. If you would like to speak up now.
Yes, sorry, I do have a question. It's just hard to put into writing. The specific question regarding a sole proprietorship LLC, right? Is there any way that the entity, the LLC, can pay, quote unquote, a salary to its sole member and only and and that salary be what's taxed under income tax, or is that not simply not a thing that can happen?
Well, there are a few distinctions here, okay? If you are the sole member, just like a proprietor, if you are the sole owner of an LLC, any income of the LLC will be taxed to you personally. And so you could, it's simply like a partnership, any income attributable to you. And partnerships, by the way, are also transparent entities. The partnership doesn't pay a tax. The partners pay the tax on the income. So usually with an LLC, the owner is just drawing money from the LLC as compensation. The owner doesn't receive a W-2 form. It's called a K-1 that is much like a W-2 because it reports what the taxable income is or what the taxable loss, what the non-taxable loss was. And so it's really a distribution of profit. But again, in the sole member LLC, the owner is considered self-employed. And so the owner will pay self-employment tax, which is FICA, Social Security tax, the Medicare tax, etc., and file as a self-employed person. It's a little different in a sub-S. In a sub-S corporation, you can divide your compensation between a W-2 salary and a distribution of profit. And again, the distinction involves some complexities that we may not have the time for, but generally speaking, in a sub-S, your wages are the basis for you making a contribution to a retirement plan. And the profit share is not. And so these are sort of fine-tuning issues that your accountant can help you through once you've set up the entity. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions? I'm happy to address.
Give me 1 minute. I have a question. What's my camera? Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, because for some reason I can't see myself in the camera. But
Try
my
to
question
speak slowly though.
Okay, my question pertains to the partnership category that we were talking about earlier. So within the time of age that we live in, because we're writing things down for agreements and we're pretty much agreeing to what the company is saying, right? Is it possible to, or is it okay to record everything that's being talked about and discussed, and then going on to that contract so that later on I don't have to try to say this person is lying and it doesn't become a he said, because we have the vertically written thing, and then we have the verbal to pretty much back up the court case. Is it okay to report those type of conversations, or would that be dismissed with the court, the jury?
So could I say we're having some trouble hearing you, but did you ask if you can record the conversation rather than writing it down as a contract?
No, yes, recording it, but also as an addition to the contract, so that we have a third source of things, because I don't want it to be he said, she said, because the person wants to try to lie, and I don't want to try to battle against them, try to get the point across. If it's already on paper and it's also on recording. Would that be acceptable in the courtroom, or is that something that shouldn't be available?
I'm sorry, I didn't get much.
So David,
But,
I
but
think what you're
everyone-
saying is you want to record the information as well as having a written contract,
Can you hear
because
me
you
now?
feel like in this day and age, I think is the way you said it. You feel like you just want to be really careful about what you're getting involved with. So you want to have a written contract. I think David, he's asking is it going to hold up in court if I also have this backup
Audio.
verbal video recording? Am I getting your question correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
I-
sorry, we're just having a little trouble hearing.
Yeah, I don't, there are issues with recordings as opposed to written documents. And it might be a function of the fact that our court system is based on very old English law. But if you have a written document and it's signed by the partners, in a court of law, that's considered an admission that everything in the document is true. And if in addition to the signatures, although it's not necessary, if you had a notary acknowledge the signatures, that's a second level of proof of the validity of the document. Because we have a non-interested witness. And maybe everyone could mute themselves if they're not talking, because we're getting a lot of noise. So you would have a notary public witness the signatures, and now that's the highest form of evidence that can be presented. I'll contrast that with a recording, whether it's audio or audio and video. The court system sees that kind of evidence as a media that's easier to manipulate or, really modify. So we rarely use audio video recordings as an additional layer of proof. And I wouldn't bother with it if you're concerned about someone saying at some point, that's not my signature. You bring in the independent party, the notary, because the notary, in taking an acknowledgement, says, I know the person who signed that document. That's her signature, and end of story. We call that a self-proving document. So that would suffice. I wouldn't go to audio or audio-visual recording. It's unnecessary, and it may not even be admissible in court. I see there's a question here. Which should I file? My CNA/home care business. She is the owner and providing several services. Again, depending on your services, you might simply proceed as a proprietorship, filing your business certificate in the county where you're located, because the nature of the services that you might be providing may not be risky, or if they are risky, you could always file an LLC or a corporation. But like any other business, you have to analyze what could go wrong when I'm administering my services. I think that, oh, I'm sorry.
Can you, I'm not sure if you can see them, David. I'm happy to read them if you want.
No, I've got a new one.
Yeah,
When
from
we
Jacoby.
register as a business entity, in my case, nonprofit, can we use a PO box or does it need to be my personal address? A PO box can't be used. And so it must be an address. It could be a personal address or the actual location of the business. And again, just let me comment, not-for-profits are a special type of entity with very different rules for operation. In a not-for-profit, there are no owners. It's really a question of an entity that has a board, and it could also have, and we don't call them shareholders, members, but the members and the board don't own the entity. That's the nature of a not-for-profit. And only certain types of activities qualify for not-for-profit status. I'm just scrolling through. Okay, it looks like the rest of the dialogue was just about copies of the presentation.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I'm planning to open custom-made gift shop, but I've been working for a few years with my husband in the same field, and he already have a DBA. Do I have to need another license to run the business, or I can keep working under his DBA?
Good question. If you want to own the business, then first of all, you could join with your husband's business, but then it would become a partnership because you would have multiple owners. So your alternative would be to create your own proprietorship so that it's a separate business. Or you could continue, as it sounds you have been, working in that business as an employee. But if your intention is to have your own business, you would either set up your own proprietorship, or you and your husband would join together in a partnership, because you would become a co-owner of his proprietorship. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Well,
I have a question, David. In
yeah.
your field, do you know any lawyers that are bilingual that focus on business banking,
Do I know any lawyers? I'm sorry.
that are bilingual in English and Spanish?
I do, but they're all in Chile. Let me think about that. I'd be happy to get back to Anne with that information. One of my colleagues in my firm spent a number of years working in a legal clinic on the west side of Buffalo. And I think he has those contacts because you're looking for people local, correct? So I will get back to Anne with some names after I speak with my colleague.
Okay, thank you. And I'll make sure to say this in Spanish so the Spanish speakers hear. Le acabo de preguntar si tiene colegas en la industria de abogados y fiscales que hablan español para poder ayudar y asesorar en tu procesos legales de negocio. Y él va a regresar a Anne con esa información. Thank you, David.
Sure. It's just as a side note, the many Spanish lawyers I work with in Chile work under a completely different legal system, which is very much the legal system of continental Europe, the so-called Code Napoleon or civil law, very different from common law as in Great Britain, the United States, Canada, and Australia. But I'm sure we have some local lawyers who are bilingual that I can refer to you.
Interpretando, Daniela. El abogado explica que muchos de los fiscales y abogados que él trabaja junto allá en Sudamérica, muchas de las leyes son basadas en leyes que se ven mucho en Europa y no necesariamente son iguales así como las que se practican aquí en Norteamérica y en Gran Bretaña. Y es bien interesante saber eso, pero con cuidados, entender que abogados que hablan español que no practican ley en Norteamérica y en Gran Bretaña puedan que tengan sugerencias que no sean apropiadas para industrias aquí. Jacqueline actually said, thank you so much. I love this class. If you can find someone for me, that would be greatly appreciated.
Great.
David, thank you very much for going through all of these, and I'm sure that there will be more questions, and but I think it's very helpful for all of us to just hear it, think about it, understand that we can go to, the New York State Department of Taxation and Finance if we have questions about the LLC and some of the other incorporation questions. Yeah, this has been very helpful, and our local counties are where you would file the DBA. It is inexpensive. I've done it myself. It takes 10 minutes. Just walk in, give them the name. They'll give you a piece of paper. But this has been very helpful to just make that distinction between personal liability, having their insurance, having these right questions. So thank you very, very much for your time. We really appreciate it.
You're most welcome, and good luck to everyone.
Thank you, David. Anne explica que en sumerar todo lo que hemos aprendido, recuérdense que para poder incorporarse legalmente podemos ir a la página de New York State, donde ahí se hacen las diferentes corporaciones que el señor David presentó. Pero si quieren mostrar o comenzar su negocio donde toman el riesgo 100%, lo pueden hacer localmente en sus condados respectivos. Usualmente cuesta la factura es bastante baja para comenzar, pero recuérdense que la diferencia o la separación de su riesgo personal no existe a menos que vayan a las opciones del estado estatal.
And David, you can see there's a lot of thank yous in the chat. So thank you very much. And we're going to take a short break let's go till about 7:30, and then we'll come back and we'll finish up with the business model canvas, our last building block on there of cost structure. So we'll meet back here at 7:30. And again, thanks so much, David. I'll be in touch. I appreciate it. Okay, everybody. We'll see you shortly. So this has been a little bit of a shorter break, but if everybody has had enough time to stretch your legs a little bit, walk around, maybe we can continue for the rest of the evening. I'd like to do, just as a reminder, that when you go to the Google site, and I think Augustine has it pulled up here to remind us about the evaluations. It's very helpful when we make decisions about bringing in guest speakers, that we get your feedback is very helpful. So there's just like 3 quick questions. And Augustine, if you want to remind us where you're going on there, it's I think it's under schedule and evaluations on the Google site, same page where you get the Zoom link. Okay. And he's also showing us that the training and recording, the recordings are there for the classes, if you need to go back and take a look. But tonight we're going to finish up by talking about the final block of the business model canvas. And that is the cost structure. The cost structure is, we're just talking about the most important costs of your business, the most important costs of your business. And we've already talked about what are your key resources, what are your key activities, and the reason we're talking about these first and the key partnerships. All of those blocks on the left side of the business model canvas. Thank you for pulling that up, Augustine. We're going to start asking, what of the key resources are the most expensive? What of your key activities are the most expensive? What you're going to find is that you have fixed costs and variable costs. So your fixed costs, as an example, your rent, maybe you're leasing equipment. We could include utilities, although they're going to be probably variable different times of the year. And then variable costs, meaning like marketing, your inventory. Sometimes people break your costs down into what's related to your product, like raw materials, packaging materials, and maybe the equipment that you need, and customer related costs. How are you maintaining that relationship with your customer? What are your advertising costs? How are you communicating? So, but I would encourage us now, we're going to just take a look, take 10 minutes and start writing down your list of your primary costs and start thinking about things like your office expenses, your rent, advertising, insurance, taxes, your internet, your phone. There's a cost to everything. When we come back, so we're going to be, as a reminder, on break next week. But when we come back, we're going to be really focusing on the financials, the quote unquote financials. And we're going to spend a few days making sure people are familiar with the numbers they need to know. But I'm going to refer to the income statement, which I want to kind of just go through this very quickly, so bear with me. On your income statement, whenever I remind myself what it's for, The very first line is how much money did you make? What's the revenue? I brought in $1,000 from selling cakes. The second line is telling us what our expenses are. The cost of goods sold. What did it cost to make the cakes? $700 maybe? We have to know so that you know what your gross margin is, which is the third line. And then we get to these expenses, these fixed costs and these variable costs. And then we take out our taxes, and then we have the bottom line. So we need to know what all these costs are before you can even set up a price. How do you know what your cost of goods sold are if you don't know what your what everything costs? Like, how would you set a price? Like, oh, I think I'll sell this for $5. Well, it just cost you $4 to get, you know, part of the part that you need to make for the $5. So, so we're going to spend a little bit of time, start writing a list of your costs. And you can begin by thinking about those two questions. What are my most expensive key resources? What are my most expensive key activities? So what am I doing? Like, in order to make the cake, I'm making the cake, and that takes time and it takes talent, and that's going to take money. But it's also going to, you know, what are the resources? The resources are the raw materials. If I'm building a building, I'm fixing a roof, I need to have roofing materials, and the activity of climbing on the roof, I'm going to need time. I'm going to need labor. So let's just start writing down, take some time and write down what you begin writing your list of costs down. While you're writing that, I just want to add that the fixed costs, like your rent, they remain the same no matter how much you make. So if you have a really great month and you sell, you know, 1,000 cakes, your rent is still the same as if you sold one cake. So it's fixed. That price, that number is not going to change if you have a good month or a bad month. And that's why sometimes people have to think about, is there a way to make a particular fixed cost a variable cost? How can I, like, a lot of mentors will say, don't jump into a fixed cost. If you're working from home and it works for now, get enough business so that you know when it's time to take the leap, when you can afford the fixed cost. We'll just take a couple more minutes, maybe one more minute to jot down some bullet points. And I'll just read off a couple things in case you need to add these to your list. Business insurance, software, travel expenses. And I don't mean like traveling from here to Hawaii. I mean, maybe around town if your business goes, takes you out if you're going from place to place. Fuel, maintenance on your vehicle, taxes, your own salaries are going to be a part of that cost structure. And even building into the profit margin, we're not talking precisely about pricing right this moment, just like what your costs are, but part of your costs are going to be your profit. You need to, what's that going to look like? Office expenses, taxes, wages, benefits. Packaging materials. Some people feel like they want to base their cost structure on the lowest possible cost. I want to sell as many I just want it to be the cheapest possible product. Some people want to have this very high value, it's just going to be my brand. It's very expensive and people are going to pay for it. Most people are going to be somewhere in between that. I saw this great video, a woman by the name of Susie Carter, Carder. I'll put it in the chat. She has some great videos on how to set your prices and just understanding your profits and your costs. She tells the story of she was looking for an attorney. She was looking for a lawyer. I think she was looking online and she got a message from someone that said that their rate, she was getting rates from $150 an hour to $750 an hour. And she said, then she got one from someone that said it would be $5. So she said, charging too little or charging too much can discredit you. So we have to understand our costs before we can start charging people. Let me just put her name in there. Then we can see if anybody would like to share with the. Would anybody like to kind of share some of what you think your most expensive resources and your most expensive key activities will be?
I don't mind sharing.
Thanks, Juan.
Sure thing. Okay, so based off what I've already have, I've noticed that for fixed expenses, especially when it comes to services like mine, subscriptions are going to be definitely a huge cost monthly and annually. Overall, I pay for Adobe Photograph plan, which annually is $125. I pay for
And just speak a little slower, but that's very helpful. This is very helpful. Go ahead. Yeah.
Sure. as well as QuickBooks, which is monthly. They charge monthly. Depending on the plan you go with, it can be, I pay $30 a month. Website is an annual charge through Squarespace. It's $276. Microsoft Business, some small stuff, but it does count.
Right.
It's around $8 a month, $8 and some cents. I round up to $9. Would count for that extra bit. Business insurance. I currently can only afford the most basic of insurance, general liability, which is annually $256.96. Monthly, it's around $21, and I forget the amount of cents, but it is something around $21. Now, for variable expenses, it can vary. Of course, that's why it's variable. But I estimate for gas, since I travel, $60 a month. SD cards, little things that I put in my camera. One SD card a month, say about $90 a month. Studio cost per month, I put aside $200. So far, that's what I have.
That's very generous of you to share with us, like what you're paying, like what those rates are right now, because I think it's helpful for us just to hear what people are paying for some normal day-to-day expenses. So thanks for all of that, Juan. And I'm not expecting everyone to have exact numbers like tonight, but your list of this information, I would say over the next week, I know we're going to be on break, but you're going to need to pull these numbers in pretty soon. And if you don't know what they are, you're going to start guessing. Like you're going to have to Google something that goes, what might this cost me? Because we're going to need to plug them in when we start doing financials. So I see Luis wrote for pay stubs, so payroll, I'm presuming, materials, insurance. Yep, we're going to start to be more specific than that, Luis, pretty soon. Jacoby is put in the chat all his long list: the property, the utilities, salaries, insurance, maintenance, equipment. Yeah, that's a good long list. You've got a lot. You've got a lot of detail in there, Jacoby. Thank you for sharing that. Who else can share some of their list? And is anybody at a point right now where they are looking at the list and plugging in numbers?
And we've started our list that's pretty long on a projection list. And yes, we've started plugging in some numbers, which we are working with. I believe his name is David Richards, who we were given his name, who is retired from M&T Bank, who is going to help us really knock down this projection piece. But yeah, some of our expenses that we have included is our mortgage, salary, our software or point of sale, any licenses, business insurance, our utilities. Obviously, that's broken down a lot on our projection sheet. Advertising, legal fees, accounting fees, groundskeeping,
Mm,
cash reserve. That's important to us. Cleaning supplies, retail products, traveling expenses, vehicle maintenance, office supplies, and then training for our employees, because obviously we'll be working with dogs. So some of our expense will go to training our staff.
Thank you, Amy. This is always very helpful. I think when we think about, Charlie's Canine Camp, we're thinking about dogs. And you just read off a list of 10 or 15 business expenses that don't have anything to do with the dog. They do, but they are there to make your business succeed. Right. Thank you very much for sharing that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Anybody else? And I think it's helpful to hear lists like this, because maybe we're not thinking of the point of sale system, but everyone will probably have, you're accepting money, and at some point you may have a point of sale, whether it's through Square or whatever it is. Like, there will be these fees that come up. And then she mentioned legal and accounting fees. Those are all being factored in. It's something just to be thinking about. Anyone else?
I can give a swing at it.
Thanks, Jordan.
Absolutely. All right. So right now I break down my costs. So first is my Legal Shield. So I have a Legal Shield account, which helps me use an attorney at low cost. So I pay about $50 to $55 a month for that. My website, I run, it's about $50 a month to run the websites, including well, not including what it costs to buy the domain. So the domain costs about $50 a year. That is attached to my website. And then I have an advertising budget of $200 monthly. That's just to start. That's very minimal compared to what I'm trying to get to. My networking and potentially, traveling to clients, events, being able to retain more clients. It's gonna roughly cost between 300, 600, and in some cases upwards of like 1,000 to 1,500, depending on if you have to stay for a weekend, if you have to cover food expenses as well, which can become quite costly depending on the area.
Jordan, make sure that you take a breath after those periods.
Yes.
For interpretation purposes.
Apologies. Yes, I will.
Thank you,
In
Augustine.
addition to accounting, I have a budget accounting, so I pay my accountant about $300 to do the taxes, and I also have to pay for Microsoft Office and Google Workspace in order to link and have emails coming into my domain name, and that's roughly about $100 within a year. And then the Microsoft Office probably about another $100. And then I've actually been trying to get involved with some AI tools, so those can be also costly to help me run my business. And then actually, I think that's it. That's what I have down for right now.
Jordan, thank you. I think each person that's saying things, we hear something else that we could possibly be paying for, or what something costs. I think it's very helpful for all of us just to hear what people are paying for, what I might need to be thinking about. Thank you.
Absolutely. No
Thanks,
problem.
thanks, Jordan.
Of course.
We just have a few minutes left. Does anyone else have, want to share real quick? I will say that Juan offered to share his experience in setting up his LLC. So we can either give him a couple minutes right now, or we can maybe do that on the next time. But what do you think, Augustine? I don't think he can hear me.
We're gonna skip that one for now.
Okay, so we'll
In
pause.
one area that I do want to bring up, y Dani, interpretar esta parte, no te preocupes, is that while we're talking about LLC formations, Incs, or even your DBA, mientras estamos hablando sobre el tema de LLCs, incorporación o propietario único, know that although none of us here, Octavio, myself, and Tanya, recuerden que ninguno de nosotros aquí, de los cuatro que estamos aquí representados, are not lawyers, we can still coach you on where to look for the best information, what are the best practices that we've noticed historically with businesses, and ways that you could be budgeting and preparing for that legal launch. Quiero repetir que aunque nadie de nosotros somos abogados, sí conocemos dónde ir para poder lanzar legalmente, los pasos y el presupuesto que van a tener que necesitar por los gastos requeridos, y también porque tenemos sabiduría históricamente de lo que hemos trabajado en el pasado, vamos a saber cómo poder asesorar. However, just be very clear, I am offering that one-on-one time with each and one of us. Estoy refiriendo y dejando saber que nuestros servicios están abiertos para uno a uno con cada uno de nosotros, but we're not legal advisors, pero no somos avisadores de temas legales. We're business coaches. Somos entrenadores de negocios, and we are proud of that, and we keep it like that.
That's perfect. Thanks,
And
Augustine.
that could be in any other subject too. It's not just legal, like any subject we've gone over. Y puede ser cualquier tipo de sujeto que ya hemos ido, no solamente está limitado a los temas legales.
Yes, we are happy to help. We can schedule one-on-one meetings outside of these classes. You know, if you have a particular question, please, stay in touch with us. You can email us. But thanks for your attention. I see Mariceli wrote her rent is $10.95, QuickBooks $30 a month, marketing $300 a month, printing costs $400 a month. She's putting her property and liability insurance $1,800 a year, website, scheduling software $100 a month. So these are where, when you start looking at numbers like Mariceli is sharing, ask yourself, is all of this required to bring my value proposition to people to solve this problem? What is really required? What's the minimum required for you to successfully bring your value proposition to people? And Amy's writing to all of us that Lauren and she knew they could figure out how to form the LLC, but that it would be too stressful, and they hired a lawyer to handle it, and it was well worth their money. So that's something to keep in mind too. So we're on break next week. I hope everyone has a good week. Take a breath. We'll all learn to pause, like during the week when we're off. We'll pause during our pause, and we will we'll look forward to seeing you on the Tuesday afterwards, which I don't have the date in front of me, sorry. But meanwhile, feel free to email us if there's any questions we can help with. And we look forward to seeing you next week, the next time we convene. We're going to be talking about finances. And then after that, we're going to prepare for the pitch competition. So that will be exciting. All right. Anybody have anything to say before we go? Otherwise, have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Ann. Have a great night.
Thank you
Thanks for
very
all your
much. Have a good night.
Everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye,
Good night,
Kayla.
everyone.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.